Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. These are all terms you've probably heard before because these are our happy chemicals. If you think about the human body as a machine with the brain as the control center, the biochemical processes that affect our thoughts and emotions become much easier to understand. When feel-good inputs are sent to the brain, happy chemicals are released as an output. Each one of these chemicals has a specific purpose in the brain's reward and punishment system, which drives us to continue behavior that makes us feel safe or happy while avoiding behavior that makes us feel nervous or sad. Originally, this system was used to develop survival instincts that were adaptable for different environments. Now that activities like tweaking our Tinder profiles and perfecting our witty Twitter banter have replaced finding edible plants and protecting our families from predatory animals, these happy chemicals are taking on an entirely different purpose. Instead of showing us how to survive, our chemical responses to stimuli are now showing us what we find fun and enjoyable. Maslow's theory of the hierarchy of needs explains this phenomenon. Human needs can be ranked in tiers from basic requirements for survival all the way up to higher psychological fulfillment. As gamers in developed countries, I think it's safe to say that our basic physiological and safety needs are taken care of. Otherwise, we'd hopefully be taking that paycheck we spent on a new PS4 and putting it towards food and shelter. Since we don't really have to worry about our daily survival, we aspire to fulfill more complex and personal needs, like successful relationships, good self-esteem, and self-actualization. This is also the point at which entertainment becomes extremely important in our lives. But what makes certain activities entertaining? What is it about reading a book, watching a TV show, or playing a video game that makes us so happy? To put things simply, these forms of entertainment are taking control of the pleasure centers of our brain and acting as positive stimuli in the same way that making good survival choices once did. Let's take a look at the happy chemicals mentioned earlier and why our brain decides to release them when we're entertained, specifically when we're playing video games. Dopamine is released when we experience successes or achieve goals, which is why we experience happiness after beating a boss or solving a particularly difficult puzzle.
Oh shit!
Oh.
Boom, dude!
Serotonin is associated with feeling important, and since most video games put you in a position of power as the protagonist, it's understandable that our brain is flooded with this chemical while gaming. I mean, how can you not feel amazing knowing that you're the chosen hero solely responsible for rescuing the Triforce and Princess Zelda from the clutches of evil? Oxytocin is the happy chemical commonly linked to love, receiving gifts, and positive social interactions. You may experience an increase in oxytocin levels when winning an in-game achievement or during victories with a party of friends in multiplayer games. Our brains use endorphins to alleviate anxiety during stressful or painful experiences so we can continue to push through difficult situations. This is what gives us a satisfying thrill during horror games or an intense FPS. The stress induced by these games is triggering our brains to make us feel awesome. Now I know what you might be thinking. Video games take control of our brain's pleasure centers? Doesn't that sound dangerous? Aren't video games addictive? Won't this make gamers why our generation is so lazy? Is gaming bad for children? Are games going to make my kids get bad grades? This is why video games are a gateway drug. Were addictive. Opponents of video games are quick to jump to the term video game addiction and point out how video games change your brain chemistry. But the truth of the matter is that every form of entertainment does the exact same thing. We have hobbies and interests because those certain activities make us feel good on a biochemical level. If we were constantly producing the same level of happy chemicals at all times, we would never be motivated to pursue our interests or even ensure basic survival. Like I said before, our bodies are just machines, and entertainment is our way of turning on our favorite switches. Let's take a look at dopamine release as an example. Gaming can cause the brain to double dopamine production. This may sound like an extreme increase, but it's pretty comparable to dopamine production during activities like watching TV, listening to music, or even going for a run. Even food can cause dopamine to double and stay at an increased level for up to an hour after a satisfying meal. Another typical human activity has an even more notable effect, commonly increasing our dopamine production by 200%. Almost all of these activities have been criticized at one time or another for causing addiction, but but these claims pretty consistently ignore the actual science of addiction. To go back to dopamine for a second, addictive substances like cocaine and methamphetamine cause a significantly more sudden and intense increase in dopamine production than gaming, 350% and 1200% respectively. Additionally, 40 to 60% of a person's susceptibility to addiction is determined by genetic factors, and if someone is genetically predisposed to addiction, they will probably struggle with dependency one way or another, whether it involves drugs, sex, alcohol, or video games. The simple existence of these things doesn't spark addiction out of thin air. Environmental factors also have a substantial effect on whether or not a person will experience addiction in their lifetime. So just like it's important to talk to our children about the dangers of drugs and keep them away from potential sources and bad influences, it's also important to restrict how much kids watch TV and play video games so that they don't become dependent on them as their sole forms of happiness. While there is much more to learn about behavioral addictions, at this point we can at least safely say that the physical dangers of substance abuse don't apply to video games. Hardcore gamers can certainly exhibit signs of psychological dependence, but won't experience the same increase in physical tolerance or painful withdrawal symptoms associated with drug abuse. And by far, the most important thing to keep in mind when we hear sensationalist stories about video game addiction is this: there is nothing inherently wrong or dangerous about video games. Addictive drugs have obvious harmful side effects ranging from lack of self-control to death. But what about games? Can't they induce violent tendencies and reduce our ability to tell fiction from reality? What about the effect of gaming on children? I think it'd be irresponsible of me to say that there are no potential negative outcomes of unrestricted gaming. In fact, most of us can probably think of an extreme example or two. So in future episodes, I'll be diving a bit deeper into these issues, while also bringing to light some interesting positive impacts that gaming can have on our lives.